Hello, and welcome to Office Hours with Dr. Dan. I'm Dan. Today's video is on writing your thesis or dissertation. And as a definition, let's say a thesis is what you write for a master's degree, and a dissertation is what you write for a PhD. Now, there's no hard and fast definition that this is always true, but this has been my experience at the schools that I've been associated with. So if your school uses a different nomenclature, that's fine. The topics are still going to be pertinent. And this video can also be helpful to people writing long research papers for their undergraduate degree that are not master's or PhD programs. Another definition that I'm going to use throughout the video is chair. And the chair is the head of your committee, whether that's your thesis committee or your PhD committee. The chair is the person who is in charge. You are basically working for the chair as far as your master's or PhD is concerned. They are the person who has the most authority over you getting out of that program. And also the thesis office, that is the clearinghouse for your thesis or your dissertation. So they call it the thesis office, but they handle both the thesis and the dissertation, and they are the clearinghouse that makes sure all the formatting of all the thesis and dissertations that are turned in meet university requirements. So for this video, I'm assuming that you've already picked your research topic area. That's already taken care of, so we don't need to discuss that. So to get into the meat of writing your thesis or dissertation, one thing is look at several thesis or dissertations from your area to get a handle on what you're working towards. And it's best if you can look at the thesis or dissertations from other people who have finished the programs who worked under your chair, because you can get a good idea of what are your chair's expectations. And go and ask your chair who he or she thinks did a really good job on their thesis or dissertation, and go and pull those from the library and look at them and see what made them special. And whether you can find someone who worked for your chair or not, you're going to get a good idea on what sections to include, formatting issues, how graphs, tables, charts, and things like that were handled. So it's always a good idea to look at someone else's thesis or dissertation. Alright, also get a hard copy of your school's thesis manual, or whatever they call their style guide, because that's what a thesis manual is. It is your university's style guide, how they want their thesis and dissertations formatted. Because it's your committee that is responsible for ensuring the technical accuracy of your thesis or dissertation. It is the thesis office that deals with formatting. So your professors, when they read through your thesis or dissertation, they're going to be worried about technical accuracy. Is what you're saying technically correct? Whereas the thesis office, which is basically a bunch of English majors and writers, they're going to be worried about formatting issues, grammar and punctuation, and things like that. Don't waste time fighting the thesis office on formatting issues. The rules are the rules. If they tell you you have to justify your thesis or dissertation and you don't like justifying, tough. Just follow what they're telling you, because it's not worth the time to fight that. You're almost surely not going to win any fight with the thesis office based on formatting issues. So just do what they tell you. And before you start writing your thesis or dissertation, go to the thesis office and ask them what are the common mistakes people make, what should you be concentrating on, what should you be looking for, so you are not going to be making those mistakes, because you know what the mistakes are and you can be looking for them as you're writing. Also, sit in on a defense for a thesis or dissertation. So this is a defense is when the person writing the thesis or dissertation, they finish their research, they're defending that research. They've gone through and they've already written the thesis or dissertation. It's not been approved by the committee per se, or it's not been approved by the thesis office, but they're defending their conclusion. So go in, if you're allowed to sit in on a thesis or dissertation, and see what you're working towards. That way when you have to defend, you've already seen one or more of these defenses and you know what to expect. And this is as good a place as any to talk about plagiarism. Plagiarism is taking someone else's work or including someone else's work in your own work, in this case your thesis or dissertation, without giving them credit. So you always have to give credit if you're taking someone else's words and to an extent their ideas. All right? And you don't have to lift paragraphs or sentences word for word from someone else's work and include it in your own to be considered plagiarism. So if you take someone else's idea, they've got this paragraph or this paper, and you summarize it in your own words without giving them credit, like here's where this information came from, here's where this idea came from. If you don't give credit, that's still plagiarism. And this is a big, big deal. You can get kicked out of school. Things can come up later that can get your degree revoked, because in the age of the internet, your thesis and dissertation is out there for the entire world to see, so people can go through this years later, and if they find something that people have missed in the past and it turns out it's a major issue, your university could come back years later and revoke your degrees, or just not something you want to have to deal with. Common knowledge does not have to be cited, meaning if you're saying something that's equivalent of 2 + 2 = 4, or the world is round, that's common knowledge. But it's like, well, what's common knowledge and what's not common knowledge? If in doubt, ask your chair or ask the thesis office, and if you can't get a definitive answer from one person or the other, then go ahead and cite it anyway. I mean, there's really no harm in getting carried away with citing rather than doing too little citing. Right. It's really hard to make progress on your thesis or dissertation until you've completed your research, until you've gotten your research done, until you've come up with a conclusion. There's going to be certain sections you just really can't do, or you can't focus in on exactly how you're going to get from beginning to end until you know what your conclusions are. But there are some things you can do while your research is still going on. You can work on tables and graphs that you have a pretty good idea, well, I know I'm going to have to put this table or graph or chart or figure in my dissertation. You can work on getting those all prettied up and formatted correctly. You can most certainly work on your literature review. And a literature review is a survey of the state of the practice. So if, when I was doing intelligent compaction for my research, I was going out and looking what's the state of the research on intelligent compaction, which is, you instrument a roller so that you know how much compaction the soil is receiving as you're rolling the roller across it. So fortunately there wasn't a whole lot out there, but I was looking in fields like agronomy and forestry in addition to civil engineering, because other fields are doing similar things. So you go through and you look at what's going on, and part of most thesis or dissertation is going to be some kind of literature review saying here's the state of the practice or the topic now, and then you're going to add something to that. You also want to make sure that you're not exactly duplicating someone else's work. So if you're doing an intelligent compaction experiment and your setup is exactly the same as someone else's, your experiment's the same, your tools that you're using to interpret the data are the same, and someone else has already published that, that can be a problem for a PhD dissertation, because for a dissertation, a PhD, you are supposed to be producing original work. You are supposed to be adding to the body of knowledge. For a master's thesis, if you're trying to reproduce someone else's work, then potentially that can be okay. So you're also looking to make sure that your great idea for your dissertation or your thesis has not already been done by somebody else. And if it has, it's okay, well, how can you tweak that to make it your own? And grad students generally pay a lot more money in library fees than undergraduates. So that's the case where I went to school. So because of that, don't be afraid to get your money's worth. And by that I mean, use the library resources heavily. There's a lot of articles on the internet now that, part of your fee is to have access to all these electronic databases as a college student that you don't have as a non-college student or professor. So if you have access to all these things, great. But if you find articles that are relevant to your work, but they're so old that they're not out there on the internet, well, at Texas A&M, grad students could say, okay, send a little email to the library that here's this article in this journal. Please scan it into a PDF and email it to me. So you didn't have to go to the library and pull the journal or go on the microfiche and get that article and print it out or scan it and whatnot. You could have someone do that for you. And I made use of that. You know, there were a lot of articles on the internet that I could just download and print out and worked fine for me, but there were some that I needed that weren't on the internet, so I had the library do that. It saved me time, and you know, I figured if I'm paying that much money in library fees, I should get my money's worth to help out. There's also interlibrary loan if there's a specific book or journal that you need and it's at a university outside of the state. I had something sent in from Chicago because it was useful to me, and that's fine. That's part of what you're paying the fees for. And on the literature review, don't get hung up on the literature review. Don't think, oh my gosh, I just got to keep going, I got to keep going because I might have missed something that's important. You're always going to miss something. There's always going to be something that you didn't find because it's misfiled or it comes out at some point after you've done your literature review. At some point you just have to say, that's enough, I'm done. Don't get so hung up on the literature review that you're never moving forward on your thesis or dissertation. So if in doubt, go to your chair and say, here's what I've done, here's everything that I've done, what do you think, is this enough? Because it's your chair that's going to make the decision, yes, you've done enough, or no, you haven't. Your chair may say, well, okay, that's a good start, but here are some other things you should check out, some other places you should go. You go do those, and then you're done. When it comes time to start actually writing your thesis or dissertation, write someplace that you can concentrate. I know up at A&M they had a lot of graduate student offices where they had these rooms at about the size of my office, but instead of me just being in the office, they'd have 4 or 5 students crammed in there. So there's always going to be someone talking or listening to music, and you can still hear it through their headphones. You know, if you can really work through that environment, great, but me personally, I can't write in a noisy, crowded environment. I have to have it quiet, so I didn't have to worry about that when I was up and working on my PhD, because you know, I have my office at home, and for a while I had a private office up at school, so there was a place that I could go and work that was quiet so I could concentrate. All right, so find some place, preferably multiple places, that you can go where you can be productive. And productive means that you're focusing solely on your writing. Turn your cell phone off. Don't go cruising the internet. Focus on writing your paper. All right. And as you're writing, back up your drafts to multiple places, because heaven forbid your laptop gets stolen or your hard drive gets corrupted. So have things, you know, even if you're storing things on a cloud account, you know, something could happen to that cloud account. I realize it's not that likely, but have things backed up to different places and store them separately. So don't have your memory stick that you're storing the backup copy of your dissertation on in the same bag that you carry your laptop around in, because what happens if that gets stolen and they get both of those pieces of hardware are gone? All of your work is gone. So be very careful about keeping things backed up. And plan for multiple drafts. You're not just going to sit down and start from beginning to end and work out your thesis or dissertation, write your thesis or dissertation in one draft. Not going to happen. So when you finish a draft, let's say you get your first draft, and you say, okay, this is the first draft of my dissertation, now I'm going to go back and start editing. Well, save that first draft, open up again and rename it. So you've got first draft file, then you have a second draft file. So don't go overwriting your earlier drafts, because maybe you decide to go out this way on your second draft and you get there, it's like, oh, this line of thought isn't working, I need to go back to the beginning. Well, if you've overwritten your first draft, then it's going to be really tough to recover your initial thought process. But if you say, okay, well, this excuse me, second draft isn't working, I go back to my original first draft, save another version of the file as my actual second draft, and start going on down the road. So don't go overwriting your drafts. Save your multiple drafts. And I'm not a big fan of outlines. So some folks are like, hey, your first step for writing a big paper once you've finished your research and all that is you write an outline. I mean, if that's what works for you and that's going to be productive time spent, great, you can go ahead and do that. But be very careful about making a super minute detailed outline, because that's just going to waste a lot of time. Get into the writing as quick as you can. I didn't have a formal outline for my dissertation. I didn't have a formal outline for my books. Basically, for my thesis, I knew what sections I was going to have. I'd gone through other people's dissertations. I saw the section headings that they had, and it's like, okay, I need this heading, I need this heading, I don't need that heading, here's what I need to do. So I knew what headings I was going to have, and I knew how I was going to proceed. And you don't have to write your thesis or dissertation from front to back, all right? Because quite frankly, you can't finish your dissertation until you've gotten all your research done, so some of those things are going to take a while. And the abstract is this quick down and dirty summary of your thesis or dissertation that appears at the beginning, and that's probably going to be the last thing that you write. After you're well into the dissertation, here's what I'm going to say, you've gone through your conclusions. The abstract is a quick summary of your thesis or dissertation, so people can read that to know whether or not your thesis or dissertation is worthy of them reading all the way through. So if someone else down the road is doing research in a similar area, they may want to go through your thesis or dissertation as part of their literature review. Your abstract tells them whether your thesis or dissertation would be helpful. But as you're writing your thesis or dissertation, make sure you follow the thesis manual from the beginning, all right? As far as margins and headings and type style, what font to use, just because it's going to make your life so much easier down the road. So if you have to go back later and reformat everything, that's going to start playing with your margins and where you have your figures and graphs. So if you start off following the thesis manual from your first draft and carry on throughout, your life is going to be a whole lot easier. And don't worry about being super neat during your original drafts. And by that I mean if you're going to have a bunch of formulas for a technical thesis or dissertation and it's going to take a while to type those in, well, you can just handwrite those out, scan it and cut and paste into your initial drafts. If you're really in the flow, if the writing is going really well, if your muse is upon you and you're really doing well writing and you don't want to get out of that mindset, or you don't want to get out of that flow to have to open up some kind of math font and start typing all the formulas in, well, either this formula goes here and carry on, or you handwrite the formula, scan it and paste it in and go back later and put it in all pretty. So if the muse is upon you, if you're really doing well writing, take advantage of that. Get as many words out as you can, and don't limit yourself, don't edit yourself during the first couple of drafts. Just get it down. You go back later and you may be reading through, oh, this is really bad. And maybe it is, and you cut it out or you rework it, or something like, oh, this came out really well, and then you move on. So don't try to do a lot of self-editing or self-censoring early on in your early draft. Just get it down and go back later and make the changes. And as far as thesis or dissertation is concerned, size does not matter. If you have a dissertation or thesis that's 100 pages or one that's 500 pages, if you can say in 100 pages what someone else says in 500 pages, that's great, because the size of the dissertation or thesis does not mean that it's a better dissertation or thesis than another one. So the longer your thesis or dissertation, the more you have to edit, the more you have to worry about citing, the more you have to write. So keep it to a minimum. Get it, it needs to be long enough to cover the subject, but short enough to keep it interesting. So make sure you're not just getting carried away and writing extraneous fluff when it's not adding to the value of the thesis or dissertation. My PhD dissertation from front cover to back page was 111 pages. Of that, the body of the dissertation, the actual meat of the dissertation, was 76 pages. The rest of that was the bibliography, it was the appendix, it's the abstract and things like that. So it doesn't matter if you have a 500-page dissertation or a 100-page dissertation. If you get in, state your theory, your hypothesis, your conclusions, defend them, get out, that's fine. Your chair is going to let you know if, well, it's a little light here, you need to add a little more. And quite frankly, the larger it is, the more of a pain it is for the chair and the rest of your committee members to read it. So keep it short and to the point. The appendix in a dissertation or thesis is generally for long derivation. If you got a long formula to derive and you're just going to put, here's my starting point in the main body of the dissertation and here's my completion, and the entire derivation may be in the appendix. And from my experience, the nice thing about the appendix is that the formatting requirements are not as strict as in the main body of the dissertation. So I had a couple of diagrams that were from other sources that for me to reproduce would have been just a long slog, and they didn't meet the formatting requirements for me to include them in the main body, but they were useful diagrams, so I just put them in the appendix and referenced them in the main body. Hey, it's in the appendix if you want to look at this diagram. And that saved me a lot of time. So if your school has that similar policy that the formatting guidelines for the appendix are not as bad or not as onerous as the main body of the thesis or dissertation, use that to save some time. And it's a good idea to have someone outside your field read through your thesis or dissertation before you submit it to your committee, before your defense, or before you submit it to the thesis office. And it's just, if someone outside your field can get the general gist of what you're trying to say, maybe they don't understand the minutia of some kind of technical part of your dissertation or thesis, but if they can pretty well get through, it's like, yeah, this makes sense, I see where you're going, I don't understand some of this math, but overall it looks good. That means you've done a good job. And this is especially important if English is not your first language. So not making fun of people, English is not their first language, but it's very difficult to write a long document in a language that you're not extremely familiar with. So find someone that is either a native English speaker or reader, or someone who really knows their English. Ask them to read through it and see what sections you may need to go work on some more. Right. And once you've defended your thesis or dissertation, your committee said, hey, you're good, you know what you're doing, this is technically correct. From my experience, after that, you go to the thesis office, and then they're going to be the ones that are going to go down and dirty and look at the formatting issues. So, we're Texas A&M, once we defended our thesis, we had to go meet with the thesis office, and that was fine. So I had a hard copy of my dissertation, made an appointment, went and talked with the person who was actually going to be the person who went through the first pass of my dissertation. So you submit it to the thesis office, they're going to assign one person, that person's going to read it, you're going to get their comments back, you make the changes, you submit it again, and you go through that process until they're satisfied that your thesis or dissertation meets their requirements. I met with the thesis office advisor for an hour and a half. We had a good old time. We were laughing and joking and carrying on. I went through, we didn't go quite page by page, but pretty much, and I was asking specific questions and marking things up so that when I was done, I knew exactly what I had to do. I knew where to go, and I was able to go out and make those changes. And I submitted my dissertation, and it was all electronic at that point. You submit a PDF, they do their thing, they send you back your initial PDF and a sheet of changes, and my changes were like half a piece of paper, half an 8.5 by 11 piece of paper. I was able to make the changes in 15 minutes. Because of that 90-minute meeting I had, I knew here's exactly what I have to do, so I was able to go through and make those. By having that 90-minute meeting, I didn't make a lot of the common mistakes. The errors that they did find, I was able to change in literally less than 15 minutes, saved it as a new PDF, emailed it back to them. 2 days later, I got back an email. Hey, there were a couple minor changes. Here's what they were. We opened your PDF. We made the changes. If you agree with our changes, we don't need to hear back from you. So that was a very painless process where, a buddy of mine who was working on his master's didn't know that we had a thesis manual, didn't know that there was a format. So he had to go through 4 very laborious cycles with the thesis office to get his thesis approved. So put in some time early on, and it saves a lot of headaches later. Right. Writing your thesis and dissertation can be a stressful process. I mean, it's a long document. It's a very technical document for your field. And that's generally the last thing you have to do to finish. A lot of times you're done with your classes, particularly for PhD students. You're done with your classes, you're done with your research. All you have to do is your dissertation, and that's kind of a daunting prospect. But remember, thousands of other people have gotten through ahead of you. You can get through. Your committee wouldn't allow you to go forward if they didn't think that you were capable of doing the thesis or dissertation. So work steady. Don't try to be perfect in your early drafts. Remember, there's no such thing as a perfect paper. You may think what you send to the thesis office is perfect. They're going to find some things. Make those changes, move on. When in doubt, the biggest thing again is cite a source. If there's a doubt about whether you should cite something, cite it. All right? Don't get hit with plagiarism. So good luck on your thesis or dissertation. Hopefully this helped. Take care, and I'll see you next time.